Howdy, y'all. I'm here. This is James Brown. I'm here with Donna Copeland and Dustin Chase from Texas Art and Film. And we're going to talk about the top five and the top worst films of 2019. Um, so there was a lot of choices. I'll tell you my personal list. I had one movie that was on my top 10 for the whole year, and I couldn't even fill out my top 10. But by the end of the year, all the winter movies that came out kind of helped me do that. I think one of the ones that was on everybody's list was Last Black Man in San Francisco.
Yes.
I think, Donna, that was your number five?
Yes. This is a unique view of homelessness. It's intriguing, it's sometimes comical, sometimes heartwarming, and at other times it's heartbreaking. The main character falls in love with a house, and this is a house that does actually have he has some personal attachment to it. In a combination of naivete and chutzpah, he claims it as his own, only to have reality intrude after a certain amount of time, after he's put a lot of work in it. The drama is filled out by a detailed exposition of his history and his personal relationships. So it's very interesting.
I thought so too. It really, it's a subject that a lot of people don't think about, gentrification and.
Yes, it has to do with the gentrification in San Francisco.
But really, really a good movie. True story, wasn't it, Dustin?
It's based on the screenwriter's life, Jamie Fells, who plays the main character. It's based on his life.
Really good. So that was your number five, right?
Yes.
That was my number four. And Dustin, that was your number. Didn't make your list? Number
It is
three.
on my list. We'll get there. You're spoiling all the surprises, James. So you want to do your number five?
Okay. So what was your number five, Dustin?
My number five is Texas filmmaker. Where'd You Go, Bernadette? Starring Kate Blanchett. It's based on the best-selling book by Marie Semple. It stars, of course, Kate Blanchett. And so this is a really interesting adaptation of a beloved book, but the book is kind of written in emails and note cards. So I found very fascinating the way that he adapted this. Kate Blanchett, of course, even before there was an idea of a movie, she was being plucked out as the person that was going to play Bernadette. But one of the reasons I liked Bernadette was because it really follows someone who has turned over their creative, artistic side to family life and kind of gets in the monotony of the everyday world. And
Like many
like many,
housewives who
yes.
started out as professionals.
And Seattle plays a really big part in the story, which I thought was really interesting. And she kind of comes to regret where she's now living. But it's just one of those tour de force performances from Kate Blanchett again. And it's Richard Linklater's the director from Texas, and he also adapted the screenplay. But that was my number five. I just really fell in love with that movie. It has a really, really, really good message. And that's kind of, as we go through my list later, that's kind of what I've been looking for this year, was something that gives a really good message. And this one does that.
I like that. My number five was Marriage Story. And I don't think that made either of your lists, but and that was one of the ones that came out at the end. And I really thought, it was just a phenomenal performance by Adam Driver. The story was very compelling. I think those of you who saw Kramer versus Kramer will be able to make that comparison. It was just really a well-made film, well-crafted. The story was very intriguing all the way to the end.
It's being very well received.
If we were doing a top 10, that would be my number 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's on my top 10 list too.
Got it. Okay, going to number four. Donna, your number four was Jojo Rabbit.
Written and directed by the New Zealander Taika Waititi. It's an ingenious anti-war film, putting the viewers into the mind of a child in a most unusual coming-of-age story set in Germany during the end of World War II. It portrays the internal experiences of a young Nazi in training, ushering us through his figuring out the Jews, whom he hears about all the time, his encountering primal fears of home searches, and his observing people he trusts glossing over facts out of humanitarian concerns, not something you typically see in a World War II movie.
That's right.
And his discovery of who important people in his life really are. But beyond that, it has many comedic moments sprinkled throughout.
Especially Hitler in a cameo role, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So a lot of people had a lot of controversy about this one because it was pro-Nazi, or it seemed to be pro-Nazi. It had the Hitler Youth, and JoJo was a Hitler Youth, and
I think if people watched it towards the end, I don't know how they could get that impression.
I think that's true too. I think if you watch it all the way to the end, then you got the message that was there.
A lot of people couldn't figure out the Hitler figure, but he's what psychologists call a transitional object, which it's like Linus's blanket in Peanuts, and so that's what he represented.
I think a lot of, I agree with that. Dustin, thoughts on JoJo?
I liked it. I didn't love it. I can easily see why someone would be offended from that movie and not make it all the way through. I've watched that one twice now. I do think, the message in the end is really good. I really loved Scarlett Johansson's character as the mom
I
in
did
that.
too.
She kind of stole the movie for me.
Yeah.
She was also very good at Marriage Story, so she's got two really good films, good performances this year.
And the Screen Actors Guild Awards nominated her for both.
For both, yes, that's right.
Which sometimes works against
Yeah,
them.
your number 4, James?
Okay, my number 4 was Last Blackman, so we've already talked about that one. Your number 4 was
My number 4 is Joker.
Joker.
Another controversial film. I saw that in Toronto, didn't know what to expect, wasn't really looking forward to it. I'm not a superhero person, film critic. I don't tend to like those films, but Joker's something entirely different. It speaks to mental illness as much as it speaks to the origins of the famous character. And of course, Joaquin Phoenix gives a once-in-a-lifetime performance, even though I feel like if you watch his films, you certainly knew that he was capable of doing this type of role. I think you could remove all of the stuff that has to do with Batman Bruce Wayne and this film would still work, just on its own terms.
Sure.
I actually particularly liked the production design of the movie, the way Gotham City is portrayed as a rundown city. I thought the score, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the composer's name. It starts with Hildur.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
fantastic, and she worked a lot.
Iceland.
With Joaquin Phoenix in getting some of the dances and the movements right, and with her music. I just found it shocking and upsetting, and I think a movie that makes you feel anything is worth noting. And again, like JoJo, I can totally understand why some people hate this movie. I totally get that. But we're still talking about it, and I think that's why it's on my list.
And it's Donna's number 3.
Joker is.
Yes.
Yes. This film, I think, has more substance than it's been credited with. Its clown metaphor is brilliantly played out in a violent thriller, but with added commentary about the consequences of the ever-widening gap between the wealthy and the middle and lower classes. Just as important, it's a realistic portrayal, like you say, of psychosis and its origins in family history. They do that very well. I think the strong negative reaction to it before it opened has more to do with people's nervousness about mental illness and they're not having much knowledge about it.
You know what I liked about Joker was it seems to me over time, each one of the actors who has played the role has added something to it. Cesar Romero, maybe the laugh, Jack Nicholson, maybe the more macabre side, Heath Ledger, the more demented side, psychotic side. What do you think we added with this one?
Well, I mean, I think that we've taking a villain and making them the main focus of the story. I mean, that's what's new. Joker's
Especially one with the psychosis.
Right, and Joker's been a character that just kind of comes in and comes out, and we know what we know from the comic books. But there was a lot added here, and again, I understand why it doesn't all add up for people, and I can totally respect that. But I think it's you have a reaction one way or the other. It makes you feel and think one way or the other by the end.
Well, that one didn't make my top 5, but it did make my top 10. It really, it is one that people will be talking about for years to come.
Your number 3. Did we know what's your number 3?
My number 3.
Yeah.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Okay.
Yes. Which yes, I'm a Quentin Tarantino fan, but this movie was so not. It was enough of the film that was not typical Tarantino that it was really something special and something unique. It was really kind of a swan song to Hollywood, an homage to old Hollywood, and you don't often see those, and you don't often see those done so well.
Scorsese's The Aviator.
The Aviator could be one example. The other thing I really liked about it is even though it's an alternative history, it kind of stayed true to reality all the way up until the end. Just really, really a well done film.
I thought his treatment of that, his twist of a real murder story was extremely clever.
Well, I would disagree with you because I think it's typical Tarantino. He's doing the same things he always does, just like in *Inglourious Bastards*, where he changes the history there with the Nazis.
Sure.
And I mean, how many car rides do you need with vintage music and vintage commercials? If you cut out the car scenes with the music and the commercials, the movie, you shave off 45 minutes.
Well, I don't know that you needed to shave off 45 minutes. I think it was very good, as it was. I mean, there was nothing that I think I could remove and not take away something
I could go
from
to town
from the story.
on editing that movie. After watching it the second time, I thought, man, there's just so much excess here. There's so much of Tarantino. Oh, I like these things, so I'm going to throw them in there. And he gets to do what he wants, so.
Okay. I mean, I can't argue with that, but at some point you do get to do what you want, and it's nice to be a director that gets to the level, like Scorsese, likes Tarantino, that he can make the movie he wants to make.
And they have enough fans
I often
that
wonder,
don't mind.
what movies might be made by other directors if they had carte blanche to make the movie they want to make, and what creativity might come out of Hollywood if that was the case in all directors. But yeah, that was my number 3, and I think it's one that, like I said, rumor is that this is his next to last film, but I'll believe that when I see it.
Yeah.
And it was a winner. So that was my number 3. My number 2, also one that I think Dustin might think was too long, was The Irishman, which is Martin Scorsese's film for the year. It's a Netflix production, $200 million budget, beautiful film using technology to turn back time and use the same actors to play young and old in film. What I liked about it the most was the arc of all the actors. If it had been a movie about just Jimmy Hoffa, it would have been maybe pretty boring, but telling Jimmy Hoffa's story through the other actors that interacted with him was a great way to retell that story. Especially Anna Paquin, who had very few lines, but her expressions, spoke volumes. And a lot of movies I'm watching lately are, especially in the Me Too era, are writing women into writing parts for women that weren't typical of the day and age in which they lived. So much so that you would wonder why we needed women's liberation movement at all if women had, this kind of equality all through history. They didn't, unfortunately. But this was a film where, even though it was historical, and they showed a woman in a historical role, she still was able, and I'm speaking about Anna Paquin and also the actress that played his wife, De Niro's wife. Well, both wives, really. I think they both really, through their actions, gave depth to a part, even though it was a traditional role for a housewife or for a daughter in that environment. And I thought that was done really well.
I just find it ironic that we have a 3.5-hour movie and they can't get more than 10 minutes of total screen time.
Well, that may be true, and I think that I wouldn't argue against that point.
Good.
But
Because I'm right.
But the length of the movie, it's interesting because there were 380 people who reviewed that for Rotten Tomatoes, and there, by last count, were 14 that said that movie was rotten. Dustin, you were one of those 14.
2 of the other are in the Houston Film Critics Society.
Yeah, 2 of the other
Maybe
Houston
more.
critics as well. And I, the length is, Avengers Endgame was over 3 hours long.
But
Lord of the Rings
they were
was 3
actually
hours
doing
long.
something in Avengers besides just growing old.
Well, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair. I think when you're telling a story, again, I wonder how many directors, if they weren't budget constrained, would have longer films and would tell better.
Well, look at the Netflix
stories.
movies that are coming out; they're all over 2 hours, so clearly a lot.
And I think that's so.
Well,
I think
most movies, the studio movies, are going to 2 hours too. It's like they don't know when to stop. I mean, you can always see places where they could have cut out a whole section and kept it.
But isn't that subjective? I mean, where you might cut is not where I would cut, and where you might cut is not
Well,
where.
it also has to do with the fact that very seldom can a movie keep me past 2 hours. Very
and,
seldom.
and that is a challenge. I mean, I think that's the issue, is that attention spans are growing shorter, and in the era of Marvel films and action movies where the action is instant and then moving from one action scene to the next, then a long narrative drama is going to be very boring to a lot of people.
Or where you have Robert De Niro sitting at a breakfast table, not speaking, by himself for 5 whole minutes without moving, and then he just walks out the door.
I don't know that he stood there for 5 minutes, but
It felt like
Oh,
it.
I'm sure you timed it.
Okay, all right. So that was my number 2. Excuse me. Donna, or Dustin, your number 2 was The Farewell.
My number 2 is The Farewell. So unlike The Irishman, that's about a bunch of white guys and directed by a bunch of white guys, this movie is directed by a female, about a female, and starring an Asian family, or a Chinese family. And it's also based on a true story. Lulu Wang making her directorial debut, I believe. She's done some short films, different things. It comes from her own experience. This stars Aquafina. The more I watch this movie, the more I love it. It's just, to be a story about a Chinese family with a particular custom where you're not supposed to tell your grandmother, an aging person that finds out that they may have a short time to live. It has a universal message of family and love and togetherness. And again, it's the message from the movie that I really liked. And the grandmother, Shuzhen Zhao, I think is her name.
Yeah,
she
was
really
hilarious.
steals the movie. I mean, if she doesn't get an Oscar nomination for supporting, her ha ho, just I'll never forget that performance. And I think anybody watching that can think of their own grandmother. It's just such a beautiful and delicate film, and I just thought it was pieced together very well.
It was especially interesting to me, having worked at MD Anderson Cancer Center for so long, and our standard procedure was to tell everybody everything.
And they mentioned that in the
Even
movie, how
children.
if we were in America, this is illegal. What we're doing is illegal,
Right,
not telling
yes.
people.
Right.
And I also want to point out that this is the third film on my top 5 that came out before the end of the year stuff, by the way.
Yeah, that's true. Farewell was also one on my short list at the beginning of the year, but you got to admit there wasn't a lot at the beginning that
There wasn't, but I'm just saying this is a rare year for me where Bernadette, Last Blackman, and The Farewell all came out before the fall.
Well, usually I kind of feel like they kind of trickle out throughout the year, and I have a nice list all year, and then maybe some drop off the list or get added on. But
Yeah, mine tend to fall away.
yeah, exactly. But this year I had an empty list until the end of the year. 2 or 3, and Farewell was on my list, the top 10, but not on my top 5.
So has everybody done their number 2s?
No, I haven't done mine. It's Parasite by Bong Joon-ho, a South Korean. And this film completely immerses you into the lives of two contrasting families in South Korea, one wealthy and the other dirt poor. It's funny, entertaining depiction of members of a very sharp, industrious family in the slums who come in stages to work for a wealthy family, and the wealthy family has no inkling as to all of these people's connections with one another. They don't realize they're from the same family. But in addition to the comedy and bizarreness of the story, the movie has substance in its presenting ethical questions for you to consider in contrasting the rich and poor, and they do it in such a way that it's sympathetic with both. So it's not a criticism of either one, but you see both sides of those lives that are very different from one another.
And the second movie that we've talked about today that really has to do with a house being a character.
And it's also
That's true.
about classes and the widening gap. This was number 1 for a long time after I saw it. And then as I got to thinking about my top movie, it usurped. So
I've watched it
felt it
3
too.
times, and I think I appreciated it more the second time, but the third time I really liked the way he has written the comedy of the film more so than anything else. I found more insight and genius in the script as it concerns the comedy than anything else.
Well, did you remain interested in those last scenes? Because those were my least favorite.
The end, that's why I couldn't give it an A, was the end. The end just goes too bonkers and kind of just destroys everything I felt that he had built up to that point.
Yeah.
Well, I could agree with that maybe. The ending was a little anticlimactic to be sure, but the film was wonderful from start to almost finish. It was my number 1 on my list for this year. Snowpiercer was a favorite of mine from previous films. Some of the films he's done that were Korean, or I've just become a fan. But this one, the class structure was really interesting. The way those two classes meshed and melded together, and how the whole concept of the parasitic relationships from the top down and from the bottom up, all that was there.
That was clever, that they were both parasites in a way.
And then, like Dustin said, the house becoming a character in itself, and without spoiling the film, how that element gets introduced, and then how that becomes a turning point in the story that no one predicted. It was just really, really a great movie. It's probably one I'll watch over and over for years and years. It'll be on my best of all time. I think that one. Um, Donna, you had a number one that I liked a lot, but it didn't make my top 10 at all. Tell us about Motherless Brooklyn.
Well, it's written, directed, produced by, and Ed Norton stars in it as well. He's a very well-known, respected actor. And I actually became more fond of it after I heard about his background and his idea in making it. It's fascinating that he had so many roles in the making of the film, but it's also fascinating in its plot, which is loosely related to a true story about a man named Robert Moses, a 1980s real estate mogul in New York City who doesn't have much of a conscience. And Norton comes from a family of developers and who did have a conscience. So I can see why he wanted to do this movie. But the action in the movie centers around a detective with Tourette's syndrome working to solve the murder of a friend and mentor, and in the process exposing the murky family history of one of the city's upstanding citizens.
So before this movie played at Toronto, there was some backlash against the way that they don't specifically say Tourette's in the movie either, even though that's obviously what it is.
No,
but,
and he actually, when somebody asked him, he says, "Don't really know."
Yes.
So I thought that was strange.
It's kind of
because
an amalgam
Tourette's
almost.
got identified
Right.
a century ago.
I think he just didn't want to coin something that was specific. But anyway, there were people
Maybe so.
making fun of the way that it's portrayed in the movie, and then there were people that were offended because they said that it was used as a comedic element and not something serious. But I enjoyed the movie more than I thought that I would. It's another 2.5 hour movie.
Yeah. Well, I thought his tics were fascinating because if you really listened to them, they had a lot of substance and meaning to them.
Yeah.
They weren't just kind of random words he's spouting out.
I think he was respectful of that people with that
I think he
affliction.
was
I don't
too.
think he was lampooning it at all.
I'm sure he's not even the type of person to do that.
Yeah. What I liked about it is it's another one just like The Irishman, where if you had told the story of Robert Moses, it would have been boring but to tell the
Well, there was a book called Citizen Jane that was about him that really turned out to be quite interesting.
Maybe that's
so
a potential
if
movie
you're
in
a
the
good
future.
writer, you can pull people in.
I think a story about Robert Moses would be fascinating to me, and a documentary about Robert Moses would be fascinating.
Especially
But
since you're in real
how
estate.
how would you ever do a feature film about him and make it interesting? Well, you have these other characters around, and you tell his life through those. Alec Baldwin, I got to say, who plays Robert Moses in the film,
Well, he's actually named something else, but it's Moses, and then he has another name.
based on
last
Robert
name.
Moses' character, right? What I'd say about Alec is, when he was younger and he was the hunky, sexiest man alive, and the roles that he got then weren't as good as the roles he's getting now, as he's a character actor that's matured. And I'd say the same thing about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Brad Pitt.
Yes.
The roles he's getting now, 12 Years a Slave, Once Upon a Time in America, he's now getting roles that are showing his ability and not just his sex appeal, if you will. Really liked Motherless Brooklyn. It wasn't on my top 10, but that was one I really liked as well. Dustin, what was your number one
I'm
film?
going to preface my number one by saying this was not my favorite year for films, and that I've struggled. One of the reasons that we're doing a top 5 instead of a top 10 is because I couldn't come up with 10, and because I refuse to have half a list that included B+ movies.
Right.
So at one point, The Farewell was my number one. At one point, Last Blackman was number one. At one point, Bernadette was number one until I watched it again. All of my top movies are A-. I did not give a solid A this year. And so I struggled to find the movie, and this could still change, that I felt passionate enough to advocate for in my different outlets. So I've landed on The Aeronauts, which has a peculiar history getting to the theater. James and I saw it at Toronto in a special screening, and I was wowed by it then, knew it was going to be on my top 10 list, but then Amazon's new film CEO person has just killed it, and so hardly anyone has seen it at the theater. It's going to be playing on Amazon Prime. But I was just taken by, they twist the history a little bit in the film, and so they change, it's basically a true story about this scientist who wanted to go up in a hot air balloon and find a way to prove that you can predict weather patterns, and basically he became the first meteorologist. And so he went up in the balloon with another male, but the film has changed it and has a combination of two female characters, and that's where Felicity Jones's character comes in as the pilot. But I just loved the story on multiple levels because I feel like it's an inspiring tale. It's something that you can learn by watching. The visual effects are stunning. And some of the scenes the balloon is real, some of the scenes the balloon is not, and you really can't tell the difference when they were actually shooting it in balloon and then the fake background.
I loved how she was the heroine.
Yes,
really,
yeah.
doing that
Yeah.
daring.
And he's
I've
almost
never been so
the
afraid.
damsel in distress.
Yeah,
kind of.
I've never been so afraid in a movie as when I was watching.
If you see it in the theater, it really gives you this feeling of height and depth.
Oh,
the way that it's
yes.
shot, there's some of the most unique visual scenes. The way the cinematographer shot it, the music is amazing. Even the original song that's attached to the movie is very good. I just love the message the movie ends on too. And I don't think this is a spoiler, but at the end of the movie, and the movie just ends with the phrase that she says previously in the film. She says, "The sky is open." And I just thought that's such a wonderful message for a movie to end on. And I was just, my eyeballs were just excited
and
for
it's not
the whole
the
movie.
expected ending.
No, it's not the expected.
You're all set up.
There's nothing about this movie that's expected. I mean, it's so unique that the movie opens with them jumping in the balloon. It tells that's I love the editing
And she's
too.
really raucous.
Yeah, it tells the backstory as they go up because it's a really short movie. It's like a 90-minute movie.
Yeah.
But that was my number one.
I loved it too. It number one, I don't know, but I loved it a lot. I think you really won't appreciate it as much if you watch it on a small screen at home than if you were able to watch it in the theater. The sound effects, and you really get enwrapped in, and you feel like you're there in the clouds, in the balloon, going through the struggle that they're going through. All of the elements of a great, struggle are there. Man versus man versus nature, man versus himself. All the elements of a great story are really there. It's a good movie, and it's one, like I said, I would enjoy more being able to rewatch in the theater than when I watch it on the small screen on Amazon. Okay, great. Now, if you guys could briefly tell me what your top 5 worst films of 2010.
We'll just go through that. Each person do their top 5.
Okay, great.
You go ahead.
Okay, well, I will start. So my 5th worst film of the year came also very early in the year, The Upside. It's a remake of the French film. This one, of course, stars Bryan Cranston and
Kevin Hart.
Kevin Hart. Yes. I try to put him out of my mind. But so that was my 5th worst. Hustlers, a film that a lot of people love, is my 4th worst. I just found nothing good to say about that movie. I understand why some people like it, but I thought that was just the worst true story to be putting out there, and it says nothing positive. The Intruder was my 3rd worst of the year. That was just a really terrible thriller with Dennis Quaid.
That was a bad movie.
Yeah. The Souvenir, which I know a lot of people love, including Jonathan Schumann, but I hated that film. It irked me in every single way. And then my least favorite movie of the whole year is a movie called Climax, which is basically just a drug-filled orgy movie with loud techno music and blinking lights, and nothing good there. That was my only solid F this year.
Donna?
Okay. Well, my 5th worst was Isn't It Romantic, with Rebel Wilson, who plays a heavyset woman who, and it's a stereotypical thing. She patterns herself after Melissa McCarthy, and that's with the slapstick, falling and making mistakes and so forth. And it distracts from more substantive points about being heavy. In the end, it just ends up being silly. My 4th worst was Ugly Dolls, which is an animated story about some hand puppets who are wanting to be adopted by a loving child. The intended message is about being genuine and worthwhile, but they aren't able to get that across, and really it's more about physical appearance, which is paradoxical since it's supposed to be doing just the opposite. And The Intruder was on my 3rd worst. And then Playing with Fire. I don't imagine you
No, but I've
saw
heard everybody
this.
say it. I think that might be everybody's worst.
No, mine is the same as yours.
No, I mean for this one, universally, I've heard
yes.
everybody has that on their list.
If you know what's good for children, you'll hate this movie.
John Cena.
Yeah, and they get quote rescued by forest firefighters, and then get into the
It looks so bad I wouldn't even review it. That's how bad it is.
nail guns, fire extinguishers, and paint strippers, and all of these potentially dangerous things. And in the end, these stupid firefighters give them a boatload of toys to take with them as a reward
For bad behavior, yeah.
behavior. Yeah. And then my most worst was the same as yours, climax. And I thought that it's really irresponsible of filmmakers to film something where LSD is put in the punch without anybody knowing it. And some people had never even had LSD, and that can be the most horrendous experience. So I really don't think and they show LSD effects to be violent behavior, which is really atypical of people taking LSD. So that really was my
Yeah, because I mean, this
favorite.
movie, they're doing the drugs and listening to all this music and doing all this stuff, and then it's like it turns into a horror movie where they like start
Yeah.
trying to kill each other, and then
Yeah.
there's children, deaths of children, and it's just bizarre.
Oh, yeah.
Glad I missed that one.
Yes, you are lucky.
Okay, so as the 2010s come to a close and we're heading into 2020, what was maybe your number one movie of the decade? Dustin?
It's very easy for me. I have only put one movie in the last 10, maybe 20 years into my top 10 of all time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big deal for me because my top 10 of all time never changes. But Call Me By Your Name definitely went in there. It's a film that just shook me to the core. It introduced me to Timothée Chalamet. I got to see what Armie Hammer could really do. And it really is a film that changed my life. And so that one is definitely my top 10.
Yes, I think I like that one too. I guess that might even make my top 10. It was a really great screenplay. James Ivory, I think he got several awards for
He
that.
won, yep. Oscar.
And did he get the Academy Award?
He did.
Yeah, it was really good. And yes, it's probably Timothée Chalamet's best to date and his first. Yeah, it's really exciting. And yeah, if this becomes a part of the Timothée Chalamet repertoire that years later people are looking back in retrospective as this was his, big opening to the world, I suspect we're going to see Timothée Chalamet for years and years to come. I don't know that we're going to see Armie Hammer for years and years to come.
Why not?
Well, I don't think Armie Hammer's skills are as astute as a lot of other
I think
people.
Armie Hammer has a hard time finding the right roles for him. I think that's his issue.
Maybe that's it.
He was wonderful in the J. Edgar Hoover movie.
Yeah, he really was. He
Oh.
almost got nominated for that.
What was the one? The Social Network?
Yep,
Was
that
he
was
in
his
that one?
debut.
The Social
He
Network,
played
yeah.
the twins.
He was great in that one too. So I'm not saying he's a bad actor. He's a great actor. I'm just wondering, in a world where there's so many great actors, does he find his way?
I think if he'd have gotten the Oscar nomination also, instead of getting snubbed, that we might be seeing him in more high-profile things. I mean, people can say what they want, but once you get the Oscar nomination,
You
it
get
tends to
better
help you
role
get
offers.
things.
I think a lot of the roles that Adam Driver is playing now could be Armie Hammer roles.
They could.
And
Maybe.
Armie Hammer, Adam Driver's really, he's sailing, he's soaring. I really think, and he hasn't put a foot
And he
wrong
deserves
yet.
it. So.
A lot of
Right.
times I think Armie Hammer's looks work against him.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that could be true. Donna, did you think about your favorite of the decade?
I could not possibly come up with one movie.
Okay.
I see too many. I like too many of them. That would be impossible. We had a hard time. I mean, I had a hard time remembering what I liked last year. We looked it up, and it was
Black Panther.
Black Panther.
Mhm.
And so I really, really like that for a number of reasons. The special effects, the sentiments, the twisting around so that an African nation was more progressive than the United States and other places in the West. So and the performances were wonderful, and you got a little bit of cultural exposure with their rights that they had for the leader.
And the first superhero movie to get a Best Picture nomination.
Is
Yes.
that right?
Yeah.
Maybe the first and the last. Who knows? We can see. Well, mine is Mad Max Fury Road, believe it or not. I
that's
honestly thought
high
about
on my
Snowpiercer
list.
being my number one because that's the one that's just kind of resonated with me over this last decade. But when I rewatch Mad Max, it's always something entertaining, something I didn't notice. There was so much going on there. Tom Hardy, Nicholas Hoult, was it Charlize Theron?
Charlize Theron.
Yeah, there was just so much going on. Each time you watch it, there's something new that you didn't notice
And it was
before.
an unusual role for her.
It really
Unexpected for any female actress.
I don't think any of them. I think that's a Tom Hardy role, but I don't think any of the other actors were playing a part that was typical of them in that film. And that's another example of a movie that took years and years to make, and you have a director that is given, you know, free reign to create what he wants to create and what he's inspired to create. And that wasn't Netflix budget money, but it was still a movie that, you know, he was able to pour everything into it, and not have pressure from the studios to you know, wrap this up, make it shorter, you know, use this actor or this actress, you know, because they're hot right now. So, you know, those movies, on my list at least, have been the ones that really have resonated with me. Okay.
So whether you agree with us or disagree with us, just go watch movies.
Yes.
Just go
Go
see
watch
movies
There are
in the theater.
plenty to see in all different modalities nowadays.
And you can find all these movies that we talked about and the reviews for them on texasartfilm.net.
Okay. Thanks so much.